The Allens Investigate, airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans. Yay, and welcome to the Allens Investigate with me, Shona Allen.
And I'm Gary Allen, the Cockney Bard.
We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM from New Orleans and also on Roku. Now, this week, we'd like to welcome back our very special guest, the lovely Andrew Gough, TV presenter, writer and editor of the Heretic magazine and active speaker on the conference circuit. Andrew is well known to many through his appearances on Ancient Aliens, Forbidden History, Ancient Top 10, NASA's Unexplained Files, and many, many more. Welcome, Andrew.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Gary. It's good to see you guys again.
Yeah,
and
good
you
to see
too.
You. Yeah.
Really excited about this evening because we're going to be talking about the Rennes-le-Château mystery. Now, for people who perhaps don't know that much about the Rennes-le-Château mystery, could you give us a sort of general overview?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, I'm told, and I have to question this, but I believe it's true, the best-selling book of all time, it's not the Bible, it's Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code.
Right,
really?
Okay.
And so what we're going to talk about tonight is the true inspiration for the greatest best-selling book of all time. What was behind the Da Vinci Code? And it's a story of Rennes-le-Château, which is, it's 1891, and there's a priest in a little hilltop village in the south of France in the Pyrenees, south of Carcassonne. Tiny little village, maybe 100, 150 people maximum at that time. And it's not a very good gig to be a priest in this village because it's in the middle of nowhere. And the church of St. Mary Magdalen is really dilapidated. So he starts to renovate it. And as the story goes, he knocks over an old Visigoth pillar, finds a couple of scrolls whose ancient writing he can't make any sense of. He goes to Paris because his bishop tells him, well, they can help you there at Saint Sulpice. And so he does. Allegedly, he spends time with celebrities like the opera singer Elma Calvé. He comes back kind of a rock star with a lot of money, and he decorates his church in a very esoteric fashion, his whole village in an esoteric fashion. So what did he discover is the essence of the mystery around Rennes-le-Château. And as we'll explore, a lot of the alleged mysteries around this story were adopted by Dan Brown and infused into the Da Vinci Code.
And I believe also it was based upon the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail book too.
Yeah, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, that's really what turned me on to it, is reading that book. Michael Bérenger, Richard Lee, Henry Lincoln. They've all passed. I've met Michael Bérenger in Rennes-le-Château, same with Henry Lincoln. And, international bestseller that told the story of a lot of different things, allegedly the truth behind Mary Magdalen and Jesus Christ, and were they married, did they have children, and where did they go after the crucifixion, which is quite a question, loaded question there. But also the story about Rennes-le-Château, and it really brought to light to the masses what people like Gerard de Sade had written about even earlier. And as I don't want to spoil the surprise because there is a real mystery in this story, but there's also more fraud and more deceit than any other mystery that I could point a finger at.
I agree.
So we'll have a good look at that, won't we?
Yeah, we'll have a good dissection of the mystery, I think.
A good investigation into it.
Yeah.
Well, that was first. It was first popularized by Noel Cabu, wasn't it? Cabu.
Yeah. Well, it is the story of this really ambitious businessman buying the priest Bérenger Saunière, buying his home. Of course, he did it on July 22nd. We'll see there's two numbers that are really key in this mystery, and they appear over and over and over again. One is 17, and one is 22. And at some point, I'll read you some examples of how that number is used in this story. But on July 22nd, which is the feast day of Mary Magdalen, the priest Bérenger Saunière, who has passed, his keeper, Marie Denerud, sells the house to Noel Carbu, who produces this really sexy article in the local newspaper about how the priest had found this great treasure. But really, it goes back, even further than that. And the whole Rennes-le-Château story is also intertwined. Well, it's intertwined with a lot. It's intertwined with the Priory of Sion. Yeah. Is that real or imagined? It's intertwined with the legend that somehow this priest discovered something in September 21st, the autumn solstice. Everyone's born or died or has a significant event on the solstices in this story, which kind of tells me there's more than meets the eye, right? It's probably allegorical.
Yeah.
But September 21st.
I was going to say, just laughingly, our daughter's birthday is actually the 22nd as well of September.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
But the thing that always perplexes me, it's September 21st, the priest, 1891, Bérenger Saunière, really humble, small town priest, writes in his diary, discovered a tomb. At night it rained. Now, I've been in the Masons. I know a fair bit about secret societies. I'm questionable on this one. Some people have convinced me it's true, but at night it rained is supposed to be a reference to, I think it's a Rosicrucian ritual.
Right, that's interesting, yeah.
So if he discovered parchments, why is he saying that discovered a tomb? So it's interesting. Right off the bat, it gets a little bit squirrely. But he kept a lot of diaries and there's a lot of receipts. And he comes back from this alleged trip to Paris, because there's no proof he went there. He comes back with reproductions of famous paintings, including Nicolas Poussin's Shepherds of Arcadia. Yeah. So mystery becomes, did he find the truth about Jesus and Mary? Did he find the body of Jesus Christ? Did he find the body of Mary Magdalen? Did he find a secret about sacred geometry in the landscape? And we can come on to the Nicolas Poussin painting, which allegedly contains a lot of sacred geometry and may have been painted, right down the road from Rennes-le-Château. Or did he discover treasure from the French Revolution, from, dare I say, the Visigoths and the Temple of Solomon? And for me, this is where it gets really interesting, and perhaps one of the most, one of the strongest pillars that, where there's smoke, there's fire, and the priest may have discovered something. And that has to do with, for me, the treasure of Solomon in Rennes-le-Château. And people are thinking, well, what the heck is he talking about? And we can only turn to when Rome sacked Jerusalem in 72 AD. In 410, the Visigoths sack Rome. And we know Rome, when they sacked Jerusalem, well, at least we believe they did, because they have documented in great visual delight on many parts of the city. They're carrying the menorah, they're carrying all kinds of artifacts from Solomon's temple into Rome. So the Visigoths sack Rome and they go back to this region. not only Toulouse, which was her headquarters, a short distance to Rennes-le-Château, but a place called Montségur and all the caves around there, and Carcassonne itself, and a place called Reda that no one's identified, but a lot of scholars, a lot of historians say that Reda is Rennes-le-Château. Wow. So the Visigoths have, and here's the other thing, what the Visigoths brought back was inventoried by a historian called Prosepius, and he's like, yeah, emerald table, check, chalices, check, everything but the Ark of the Covenant, and there's no mention of the menorah.
Interesting.
So that, to me, is one of the really strong pillars. So in this area, allegedly, there's artifacts from the Temple of Solomon. And, okay, well, has anybody looked for those? Yes. The greatest Grail hunter, the greatest treasure in antiquity, I should say of antiquities, was the reluctant Nazi Otto Rahn. And they're like, Himmler is like, go forth and conquer and bring us back the Holy Grail.
And I think, am I right in saying as well that I believe the Nazis actually were in Carcassonne trying to find treasure there too?
They went everywhere, didn't they, the Nazis?
They went everywhere. And they were supposedly just north of Rennes-le-Château, which is, a 30-40 minute drive south of Carcassonne. But Otto Rahn had access to anything he wanted in terms of, ancient artifacts, information, access to anything he needed to make his mind up about where he needed to go to find what Himmler and Hitler were asking him to recover. Part of that's the Holy Grail. So he goes to Montségur, which is not far from Rennes-le-Château. That's the last stronghold of the Cathars.
Yeah, I've been up the top of that. That bit of a scary climb, I've got to be honest.
It is such a deceptive climb. You look at it and you think, no problem. And about 45 minutes into it, you're just panting and wheezing. And
well, I think at one point at Montségur, there's it's about about 2 foot from the edge, and I was sort of looking at it and I thought, oh my God, and you start to feel a bit floaty.
Did you get vertigo?
Oh my God, yeah.
It is one of the most difficult walks up a hill that I've ever set out to do, because it looks so easy, but it's not.
No. Did you ever meet Rick Stanley? I mean, Rick Stanley, he was a tour guide up there, and he would go up there 3 times a day.
Yes. No, Richard is.
God. Yeah,
Richard is, of course, Mr. Otto Rahn. He's made the definitive documentary, and he's produced, directed a Nicolas Cage film. He's done really well for himself. Yeah. But and this is where it gets so interesting for me. Is you have Wolfgang Eschenbach, who only wrote history. He didn't mess around with fiction. When he writes Parzival, he's saying that this mountain is Mount Sauvage. Montségur is Mount Sauvage from the book Parzival. And what's interesting is that he has a hermit. When I do a lot of television, there's always somebody sitting over here who listens to every word I say. And when I mispronounce things, he'll go, you said nuclear, but it's really nuclear. Can we do that again? Okay, thank you. But it's Trezevant or something like Trezevant, the hermit who initiates Parzival. Well, that's the same hermit, same name, who is showing a latter Visigoth king, Roderick, where things could have been hidden in some of the caves around Montségur. And I've been in all of those caves, literally spent weeks hiking through them. And one of them is the Cave of Lambrives, and a latter Visigoth king found an emerald table. And when Otto Rahn arrives there, he becomes good friends with Goudal, this really famous French researcher who takes him under his wings and shows him all these incredible Cathar caves. And when Auron left the area, he left under the guise that he found what he was looking for. So for me, immediately it becomes credible that perhaps the priest had found something. If his village, Rennes-le-Château, was the ancient Reda settlement that the Visigoths took some of this treasure back to.
Yeah, it's interesting because as far as I know, that in the Nuremberg trials, they never mentioned anything about the Holy Grail or, the Nazi search and the Knights of the Round Table and all this kind of stuff, which they were heavily involved in, weren't they?
And I think the occult was missed out.
The occult was missed out. Yeah, we better miss that.
It's funny how that happens. And but the thing, and it's my colleague in crime with the Heretic and my website, Mark Foster, brought to my attention that 2 English Oxford historians both lost their jobs for doing proper research and coming up with the fact that the Allens, there you go.
Yeah, we were there.
The Allens from Iran came to the south of France and renamed themselves the Troubadours, and the Troubadours and their stories are what Eschenbach used for his historical account of Percival. And what they say is the Grail is a pearl. But nevertheless, right off the bat, there's a historical pillar that says the priest could have found something really interesting in his church, because if it's Reda, or even if it's not, this is the area where the Visigoths took the treasure of Solomon. And I think Dan Brown has got the best research team perhaps in the world. And back in the day, my discussion forum, Arcadia, was the leading esoteric discussion forum, particularly on all things Rennes-le-Château. And I know Dan Brown frequented that. And when he writes the Da Vinci Code, in the opening scenes, he has the curator of the Louvre Museum dead, sprawled out in the form of a pentagram on the Louvre floor, and his name is Saunière. So that begins the sort of ode to Bérenger Saunière that put into the Da Vinci Code. But this idea of the Holy Grail being a bloodline of Jesus and Mary is also really integral to Rennes-le-Château, because there is a lot of suggestion that Jesus and or Mary were there and may have died there. Kind of an audacious sort of claim. There's one book, Jesus After the Crucifixion. Forgive me, I love the title. And it explains all the things that Michael Bérenger talked about in his books, that Jesus is being crucified, and his uncle pleads, the very wealthy Joseph of Arimathea, pleads with Pontius Pilate that he's dead. He's dead because he put this cloth up to his face, and all of a sudden he's passed out. Don't break his legs. He's dead. Let's just take him down. He's dead. And then when they meet him in the tomb, they meet him with a well-documented amount of myrrh and aloe. Ridiculous amount for somebody who's dead. Ridiculous amount for someone who's alive, unless they have a lot of wounds that need to be healed. And we all know that the legend of Mary Magdalen in the south of France is a very strong legend. And one of the legends say that, she didn't land in Provence, but she landed closer to Perpignan, and thus traveled over to the west to Rennes-le-Château.
Andrew. So really, for this story to hold any sort of water, you'd have to believe in the Bible and its characters, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's a loaded gun and maybe a topic for another chat, the historical Jesus. But one thing is clear is Bérenger Saunière, when he discovers these parchments, allegedly goes to Paris, comes back, he has a lot of money in his diary, in his receipts. He's drinking more than he ever has. He's drinking to excess. I became good friends with Jean-Luc Robin, who lived in Villebetheny, who is Saunière's home. And he was the caretaker of it in the 90s. He was literally assassinated. I spoke to him the night before he died. One of the things he was trying to do was get the current mayor, who I interviewed, sat across from, ousted. This is a mayor who supposedly would go up in helicopters, military guy. Need to be careful. Push people out of the helicopter and see if they can shoot them to their death before they landed. You know, that's the kind of so he ousted him from the mayor's office in Rennes-le-Château, but he died. But anyway, he lived in this house, and he found, for instance, deposit slips that were provided that Bérenger Saunière had for a bank in Budapest, and I've been to that bank with. And there's some debate on this, but everyone claims everything's a fraud or made up, and here's why. But the story goes that it's a checking account whose checking account number is the next successive account from a Habsburg.
Okay.
And there's stories of the Habsburgs. He was called the Stranger, coming to visit. And visited Saunière. And there's a school of thought that Saunière didn't discover anything. He was told where to look. And this story of him going to Paris to Saint-Sulpice, the priest in Saint-Sulpice at the time was Abbé Hoffet, 18 years old. What's a young kid gonna tell anyone about these ancient documents respectfully? But for me, that one of the really curious things is the Michael Bagent book, which talks really about the Jesus papers, the Oxford connection, Oxford, England. There's a priest, Canon Lilly, and that was contemporaneous with Saunière. Right. He was an expert in Old French, and he was teaching in Oxford. One of his students recounted in a letter to Henry Lincoln that Michael Bagent turned into a book. It was the two co-authors of Holy Blood and Holy Grail. That said, it had quotes from Canon Lilly. Canon Lilly, again, was Bartlett's teacher, who said that he was called to Saint-Sulpice to help interpret documents that were brought from the south of France that a priest had brought. And these documents were irrefutable proof that Jesus either survived the crucifixion or wasn't crucified and lived to about 45 or 50 AD and was known as the Christos. And that those documents were sold to to somebody, I didn't say who, for a large amount of money to make them go away.
Interesting.
And I've thought long and hard, because there's so much fraud in this story as well. Come on. I thought, well, what would be the motive? How could Bartlett, who has real credentials, make that up? And so he had read the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and wrote one of the authors. But what that does, it brings the Habsburgs to light. And my good friend Jean-Luc Robin, who was assassinated in this tragic story, really brought to light in his book the possibility that the secret of Rennes-le-Château were papers that proved that Jesus wasn't crucified. He was a man, a human, like all of us. He wasn't the Son of God any more than any of us was. And he discusses the possibility that you have Karl Joseph, he's the head guy, right? And he's the head Habsburg, and he's sending his one of his own to Rennes-le-Château, and they go there, and there's other evidence that at this time Plantard is going there, and this is long before Gerard de Sède has written the first book about Rennes-le-Château. Pierre Plantard, the alleged Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, who's been to prison for fraud, and later he makes everything up. He's just a complete hoax. But he's going to Rennes-le-Château. But more importantly, this Habsburg's going there. And this guy changes his name, gets on a boat to Argentina, and never hears from him again. Then the priest makes his discovery. So he's gone. Who's heir to the throne now? Well, that's Franz Ferdinand, who gets assassinated in Sarajevo in an event that many people think leads to the First World War. The Black Hand allegedly assassinates him. So he would have had the secret that Jesus lived, but he's dead now. So who now? Karl Joseph dies, and within, I think it's 30 days of his death, Saunier's dead. Saunière dies on the 22nd, but he gets ill on the 17th. Those two numbers again. Who's the heir to the throne now? It's a guy who's so, it's a Habsburg. Remember, the Habsburgs decided who the Pope was going to be for hundreds of years. They ruled the world. They're like the World Economic Forum of their age. And they were the most powerful family in the world. They were in decline. Everyone's dying. And here you have the last heir. He's not a very good guy. And guess what happens? The Catholic Church puts him on the ladder to sainthood.
There you go. There you go.
So what did he exchange? Did he exchange documents that prove that Jesus wasn't crucified? That was all a lie. Or maybe he did, but he survived, and that was a lie. To make those documents go away? It's an interesting question.
I think you have to look at in everything that we ever do. We always seek the facts, and if it's proven beyond doubt, then we're happy to accept it. Other than that, we keep a keen ear out for everything, because the truth is absolutely paramount, and there is nothing else. There's nothing else but truth, and that's the way we see it. So we are happy to hear everybody's story, and we have our own view on some of the things, and we let the listeners sort of decide for themselves and go on their own search for the truth.
Yeah, and I think I'm with you on that. I was such an enthusiast of this story. My forum was just thriving with everybody who's a thought leader, pro and con on the story. And I attended all the societies that studied it. The Saunière Society, Rat Scabies' father, now Rat Scabies runs that. I went to the Guy Patton Rennes Group meetings, and I eventually replaced Guy Patton as the chairman of the Rennes Group. So that was a group in Oxford that got together, about 15 people, and they would sit around. I was like by far the youngest. That just gives you an idea. But they were great. They really knew their stuff. Oh my goodness. And very critical of all the elements of the story. And I thought, rather than speculate about Patrice Chaplin's theories or Andre Duzet or Isaac Ben Jacob, I'm going to bring him to our meeting. That's what I'm going to do. And we can talk to him in person. Let's do that. so I took over the Rennes Group and made it a very interactive thing. I moved it from Oxford to London, and for every meeting, I brought in a really big player in the mystery. And there's so many of them, and I have to be careful because a lot of them are my friends. I mean, Andrew Gough, I've been to his home. He slept in my home here in London. He and his wife. Andrew Gough is a researcher who kind of built on this interesting story of when the priest Bérenger Saunière became ill. He had already requested a topographical model of the Holy Land. Excuse me.
I hope that's gin and tonic you've got in that.
It's very, very telling that I'm choking now at this moment in the story.
You've only got another hour and a half to go.
You haven't been poisoned.
I've been poisoned. If I flash you know what the problem is.
Lord.
But this topographic model, about this big, has all the place names, the tomb of Joseph Arimathea, Gethsemane. It's got all the stuff that we know, but topographically, it doesn't match Jerusalem. And the fact that the Bérenger Saunière allegedly ordered this to be made, people thought, oh, it must be Rennes-le-Château. Let's map it into Rennes-le-Château. It didn't work. But it was Andrew Gough who mapped it to a place called Perilous, which is straight east of Rennes-le-Château, maybe an hour's drive near Perpignan. Perpignan Station is where Dali had that portal experience and just went nuts and went into some other dimension. But this area, Perilous, has tombs from the lords of Aragon. It's a very creepy place. I've been there with Gough, my good friend, the late, great Philip Coppens, Kathleen McGowan. I've been there with her. And I've stood there with Andre, and I would say, point to me. Just point where the tomb is. Just give me a feel for it. And he did. And he had pictures of the tomb entrance, and it's this unbelievably cool, massive oval shape with a big oval stone that's closed it from the inside. And you just think, wow, you've got it. You've got the tomb of Christ right there in Perilous. Well, somebody found that image, and it's about this big. It's not a tomb 6 feet high. It's about this big, and it's a known geological thing. And none of that appears to be true. Forgive me, Andre. So that notion of Perilous being part of the mystery kind of faded away. You know, the very first part of the mystery, as the mystery goes, is the Blancheforts, who were in the Crusades. I think that the sixth Grand Master of the Knights Templar at Blanchefort. So Blanchefort marries another noble, apparently learns a secret. This is in the early 19th century. The secret is very great. So she tells the priest, Abbé Bijou, in Rennes-le-Château, what the secret is. And as she gets ill, she confides this to him. He allegedly creates her tombstone that has clues on it, strange raised letters and references to keywords that would be used later to decipher the parchments. And there's a letter from Bijou dated to the time that he left in the church in Rennes-le-Château that states, because he fled to Spain. He was afraid for his life. He fled to Spain, never to be heard from again. And the letter states 11 times, Jesus Christ of Nazareth is not in this place. He is not here. 11 times. So we've speculated, does that mean that, I think it even says the body of Jesus. So does it say that some people thought the body of Jesus was in Rennes-le-Château, and I'm here to tell you that it isn't, or this is not a place of God. This is not a place of Jesus. This is a bad place. It's a place of Satan, for instance. But curious, and Bijou himself confided in a couple other priests, and those priests confided in Abbe Janvier, who was the priest in the neighboring village of Rennes-le-Ban. And it gets kind of interesting because during his time, he's given this amazing painting that's still in the church today that shows a tomb, a cave with Mary Magdalen and Jesus and this big rock on the outside. And that landscape, and I've been there, I photographed it, you can see it on my website, exists outside of Rennes-le-Château. Come on to that in a moment, but Janvier and Rennes-le-Ban, then he's replaced by Abbe Boudet, who writes these incredible books, really peculiar books about the mystery of the dolmens and the standing stones around his village. And he gives huge amounts of money, not to Bérenger Saunière, but to Bérenger Saunière's woman, helper, Madonna, Marie Denerud. And the two of them are really, really close, as is a third priest who is just down the road from Rennes-le-Château. He's, I think, 70 years old at the time. There's a knock on the door, and it is All Souls Day, always a significant date. And he's bludgeoned like over a dozen times. There's lots of French francs lying around. They don't take the money, lay his body out in a very peculiar way. But they murdered him. And he knew who the people were at the door because he let him in. There's no sign of struggle. So all these priests really kind of behave in a very, very strange way. And the one who was assassinated is the one that Bérenger Saunière contacted first when he wrote, discovered a tomb, at night it rained.
Interesting. Yeah. I was going to ask you, Andrew, as well, because I have to say, through my own, I'm by no means an expert on this, but from my own sort of investigations and journey on this, I did notice a connection quite strongly with Freemasonry. Now, I know some would probably vehemently disagree on that, but there are curious things, one of which was the fact that Antoine Captier, who was the grandson of Saunière's bell ringer and keeper of his archives, actually showed a Masonic collar that actually belonged to Bérenger Saunière. And also, I believe that there was, he attended at least 3 meetings at a Martinist lodge in Lyon. Now, the Martinists obviously have the seal of Solomon, which is the black triangle interlaced with a white one, which obviously is quite significant.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that, and I'll see you and raise you a another degree there, because I think Saunière was. You can just look at his regalia. It's in the museum in Rennes-le-Château. You can see it to this day. It's got Masonic symbolism on it, and that's not unusual for the time. But what he appears to have been doing is being part of something called le sang, the blood, the selling of masses. So it doesn't matter if you had a good life or bad, you could still go to heaven and avoid going to hell if you pay some money. and he says a lot of masses for you. And it really appears as though that's what he was up to. He would disappear, Saunière would, for days on end. Nobody knew where he was going. And it now appears that, according to the work of Patrice Chaplin, who is married Charlie Chaplin's son, her books have been turned into blockbuster Hollywood films with Ellen Burstyn and Isabella Rossellini. Siesta was one of them. And out of the blue, she wrote City of Secrets. And I remember my good friend Lynn Picknett saying, I shouldn't tell you this, but Clive and I have been asked to review this book from this woman who's written about Girona, Catalan, Spain, being the real source of the mystery of Rennes-le-Château, not Rennes-le-Château. I'm like, come on. So I do a beeline to Primrose Hill. I get to know Patrice really well. I've traveled with her to Girona many times. And it's interesting because Girona is not far from Rennes-le-Château. And what do you have what's the major thing that Bérenger Saunière did when he got back from Paris? He creates a tower, the Tour Magdalen.
Sure, yeah.
And everything is about Mary Magdalen at this point. Her feast day is the 22nd of July. 2 sets of 11 steps lead to a platform that lead to the tower of the Tour Magdala, Tower of the Magdala, where one tile on the floor has a red dot. The other ones don't. It points up the stairs. There's 22 steps, one window shaped like this that points at 22 degrees to a grotto. You can see the picture on my website. It's completely unambiguous, whose ancient place name is the burial site of Mary Magdalen. Now, I've been there, and it looks like a grave. So it's interesting. But what do you find in Girona is another tower, but that tower has been destroyed. But if you draw a complete diagonal from Rennes-le-Château to Girona and go straight up from Girona, you go to Perilous, but let's hold that for a second. Right in the middle of these two, alchemical towers is Mount Canigou, which is the most sacred mountain in France, and one that Chaplin argues from the history of the keepers of the secret society in Girona has a portal on it. And Girona is where a French woman lived that Chaplin had met in her youth. She's English, but she kind of ran away to Spain at a young age. And Cocteau was there making a film with this French woman. Well, the French woman was Bérenger Saunière's lover. And in the French woman's house, there was this altar painting, which appears to be the same altar painting that Saunière brought to the church, which is there today, showing Mary Magdalene in a cave with some buildings in the background that look a lot like Rennes-le-Château. So it's all, it's tough to kind of summarize, but the Girona aspect of the story is interesting. I interviewed a lot of people. I interviewed one woman who was 98 with a translator, and she recounted her mother telling her about the priest from Rennes-le-Château visiting, a woman who has no agenda whatsoever. So it's interesting. It's an interesting aspect of the story. And Patrice has written a number of books, City of Secrets, The Portal, about this.
So really you could say that actually there were, because Magdala is obviously Hebrew for tower, isn't it? So you could say, in effect, there are 3 towers, which reminds one of the 3 pillars of Freemasonry again, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, again, I have to keep it in perspective. I was a Freemason. I really wanted to join. I remember reading the Hiram Key and thinking, oh, man, I need to know about that. So I joined up. And I really liked it. I did a lot of different degrees. I progressed very quickly and went quite high into it. But it takes a lot of time. I mean, if you're in 3 or 4 lodges, you have 3 or 4 different play practices. I call them plays, ritual plays. every week. And I just said, maybe someday when I retire, I'll come back. So when I hear people talk like Freemasons are ruining, the world, and then they're these horrible. Nobody on the planet gives more to charity and local charity, not by giving people money, but by taking it out of their pocket and giving it.
Exactly.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's probably quite a lot of disinformation floating out there, isn't there? Maybe for a reason, possibly. But
I mean, we was invited to become Freemasons, but the whole point of it is that we want to be free. So we don't want to belong to anything. That's the way we are. And but as you quite rightly say, the philosophical Freemasons interest me in particular. But as you say about the fact they give so much to charity, and I think a lot of people, there are Masons who've joined it for the wrong reasons, and obviously they, they're in all kinds of jobs, called from the judiciary to the police to all kinds, aren't they? But I don't know, it's interesting.
I think there was a time when it could have been a bit of a influential and sort of, if you weren't part of the boys club, then you didn't get that promotion. I could totally see that. Today, the world is full of really bad, horrific secret societies. I personally don't believe the Freemasons are part of that. Look at the WEF and look at a whole bunch of other ones I won't name because I don't want to ban you on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so, but you're right. Saunière was part of all those. Rosicrucian, Freemasons, a Martinist, and Lesage, and this selling of masses. And there's all kinds of stories of bodies being taken on trains to Perpignan station. Again, that's the biggest major train station, or one of them near Saunière, and having these rituals performed on the body to ensure that it went to the right place after the soul had departed, et cetera, et cetera. Real or imagined, it appears to have been big business.
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't know what it is, Andrew, but I keep seeing in my mind's eye a spider's web with a spider on it. I don't know if that means anything to you or not.
Yeah, well, it's I think it's a very apt description. If you look at the three co-authors to the book that really brought this story to the world, Gerard de Sade, The Gold of Rennes, was huge in France, right? But nobody else read it really. But we should go. Let's just revisit that for a second. This is Gerard de Sade in the 60s. He writes a book, but we now know that Pierre Plantard had a stab at it, and he gave it to de Sade. There's also this chap called Philip de Chérizy, who hosts a radio program that exists to deceive the listeners. He's an actor and just all around sort of inner circle kind of guy. He and Henry Lincoln, who has recently passed, and I've sat and interviewed. Check out my interview with Henry Lincoln. It's one I researched that for months in advance of meeting him, and really asked him a lot of tough questions. So you have Henry Lincoln, one of the co-authors of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, Gerard de Sade, Philip de Chérizy. I think all three of them are complicit in creating this big lie. And you mentioned the spider, so I'll just dive into it. Rather than end on a sour note, we can come back to some of the cool stuff. But I can't believe no one's ever thought of this or noticed this before. But it was 2015. I was filming Inside Secret Societies for American History Channel in Saint-Sulpice in Paris. And I'd been there before, and I just looked around and I went, wait a second, Philip de Chérizy lived in the immediate vicinity of this cathedral. And the first thing you see when you walk in in the holy fountain thingy is a huge octopus. What's the number one symbol of the Priory of Sion? An octopus. Well, I look up in all the stained glass windows, and it says P.S. Priory of Sion, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
No, it's Peter and Sulpice.
Yeah.
Saint Peter and Saint Sulpice. So you can, all right, fine. What else? You've got this amazing gnome that Dan Brown has sensationalized. First of all, Saint Sulpice is not on the meridian; it's a couple hundred yards away. But you have this notion of meridian and light shining through a window at midday.
To the blue apples, yeah.
Onto the floor. And in Rennes-le-Château lore, you have this thing we now know is written by the Priory of Sion, which means it was probably de Chérici or Plantard or de Sède, maybe Lincoln, but I doubt it. One of those guys that has a little bit like a paragraph of esoteric rambling on each of the 12 constellations, Virgo, Scorpio, etc. And it talks a lot about meridians. And it talks about, as you know, blue apples at midday. And everyone goes to, I've been there at the church on January 17th at midday. Sun shines through the window like it does every day of the year.
Yep.
And the glass windows produces blue dots on the floor. But de Chérici, he's already gotten the PS. He's already gotten the octopus. He's already got this notion of light coming through the window at midday. What else does he get? They have the Codex there. The Codex, which is like this 5th century Latin New Testament that's now in Cambridge, but it is exactly what Parchment 1 and Parchment 2 is. Exactly.
Yeah. Do you know why I went to Saint Sulpice and I can't for the life of me remember anything about it. But I know I was there, and I was in awe of it. I thought how wonderful it was when I went there, but that was many, many years ago. So you're refreshing my memory on this, yeah.
I mean, so everything, and of course, what's the feast day of Saint Sulpice? January 17th.
Janvier.
So every single Priory of Sion document was written on January 17th. Everything happens on January 17th. It's when Bérenger Saunière dies on January 17th. It's when the son of the Merovingian king, Sisilbert, arrives at Rennes-le-Château or dies, or I don't get it all. Everything happens on the 17th. De Chérici would have gotten the 17th from his local parish. He would have gotten the PS. He would have gotten the octopus. He would have gotten blue apples at midday. He took all of that, worked with Plantard. Plantard worked with de Sède, and he produced this book. And then you have the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail building upon it.
Yeah.
And so it's tempting to just take that baby and throw it out with the bathwater, because it's one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated. And it's not like it was a whimsical fraud. It was a long-term fraud. In the biblical French National Library, they're putting in documents of Merovingian bloodlines and lineages starting in the late 50s and in the 60s, and in 65, de Chérici has said, I wrote the parchments, I did it, and I put it in the library in 1965. But no amount of confession will stop the believers from believing.
It's quite interesting that Henry Lincoln in I think it was 1968. I can't remember the name of the film, but he was in a film in which he started to play an older guy who publishes a book or something, and that book then becomes famous worldwide. Well, that's what happened.
Yes, and so thank you for bringing that up, because the whole thing is de Sède publishes a book that has parchments that he doesn't explain. The parchments that Bérenger Saunière discovered are in Gerard de Sède's book. No one knows what they mean. But Henry Lincoln, who happens to be fluent in French, an actor, contemporaneous with de Chérizy, reads the book while on holiday with his family and goes, oh, those parchments seem a bit weird. Hang on, there's raised letters. And so he contacts de Sède to say that he's figured out and decoded it. And there's a famous photo of Henry Lincoln and de Sède in Rennes-le-Château, and de Sède's giving him a black eye.
Really?
And
I think that one.
Why would you do that? But one of the things that de Sède, and it's so murky, but de Sède, who wrote the first book that Henry Lincoln saw the parchments and decoded, de Sède told Henry Lincoln about the Poussin tomb. Now, I am guilty of thinking and believing that both the Meridian in France and now the Meridian in England would have been a convenient way to mark where things were. You didn't have safety deposit boxes or, access storage back then. You buried things in the ground, right?
Yeah.
So on the French Meridian, a couple miles from Rennes-le-Château, is a tomb right next to a big standing stone. The French Meridian passes right through it, fact. And this tomb, the types of trees behind it, and the exact mountain range behind it are featured in Nicolas Poussin's Shepherds of Arcadia.
Shepherds of Arcadia, yeah.
And, that's one of the things that's featured in the parchments and all this decoding is even I, Datham in Arcadia, at an Arcadio Ego. And so there's pictures of de Sède standing on the tomb. It's big. Everything is exactly how it is in the Poussin painting. Now, this Poussin painting, Shepherds of Arcadia, it's a big tomb and shepherds are standing over it. And one of them is pointing at the letters RC in Arcadia. RC.
And the arm is interesting how it's bent, isn't it?
Well, the shadow is pointing to the head, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm going to see that painting again next week. I'm going back to Paris. If I the riots and the rubbish strike, I'll be okay. This painting is really special because Louis XIV was looking for it for a long time. He wanted to possess it. And his brother, the superintendent of finance, Fouquet, has a letter to someone in Italy who knows Poussin. And Poussin tells him about the painting. And the letter says, let me see if I have it handy in the notes, I'll read it because it's so really evocative. And am I going to find it? It doesn't look as though I'm going to find it.
Was that Foucault or Foucault's pendulum?
No, but you're referring to my single favorite book of all time.
Foucault's pendulum, yeah. That was I can't think of the author of that.
Umberto Eco.
Umberto Eco, yeah.
And he was visiting Rennes-le-Château here. Well, forgive me, guys. I can't seem to.
Oh, don't worry.
This could be it. Let me see if
you can get it in the second hour anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So this is 1656. The Abbé Louis Fouquet met with Poussin in Italy, and afterwards sent a letter to his brother, Nicolas Fouquet, who was the superintendent of finances to Louis XIV. It reads, "He and I discussed certain things, which I shall with ease be able to explain to you in detail, things which will give you, through Poussin, advantages which even kings would have great pains to draw from him, and which, according to him, it is possible that nobody else will ever rediscover in the centuries to come. And what is more, these are things so difficult to discover that nothing now on earth can prove a better fortune nor be their equal. Very dramatic, right?
Yeah.
And so he acquires the painting and he puts it in his private study under lock and key for the rest of his life. And his brother, I mean, it gets a bit murky, but there's a school of thought that says the man in the iron mask is the one who knew the truth about what that painting revealed and was kept imprisoned. Didn't want to kill him, but wanted to keep him quiet about what he knew about that painting. And the supposition is that painting, that Poussin somehow either came to Rennes-le-Château or somehow saw a sketch of it and created Shepherds of Arcadia and encoded something special in it. And this is where it gets really, that isn't weird enough. Henry Lincoln, because he's been told by Plantard, here's this tomb of Nicholas Poussin, and the Shepherds of Arcadia is one of the paintings that Bérenger Saunière made a copy of when he was in the Louvre in 1892. And by the way, in 1892, the Louvre didn't make reproductions. So that's a lie. But our attention is drawn to that painting. So Henry Lincoln has it x-rayed. And when he x-rays it, you can see the first thing that Poussin drew was the staff of the shepherd next to the tomb, not the tomb, the staff. Okay. And that sends him on a journey of identifying pentagonal geometry all around Rennes-le-Château. And even Professor Conford of in London is on video saying that there's pentagonal geometry encoded in Shepherds of Arcadia. And Henry Lincoln would argue that there's churches in a complete circle, all exactly 2 miles apart to the foot. And all this other sacred geometry. If you would have gone to Rennes-le-Château when he was still alive, he would get the map out and show you. And it was quite impressive. But it was also, I mean, people like Putman and Wood came out with a book that's totally defied that, to say everything that Lincoln has shown you occurs within the probability of chance. But it was as though Lincoln was trying to say, look over here, sacred geometry. Don't look at the lies I told you before. I think he was absolutely implicit in aiding Plantard in an orchestrated event to say, oh, look at those parchments. You know what they really show us to go off on this journey? He had 3 BBC documentaries, Henry Lincoln did, as a result. That's lucrative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not, so that's really fraudulent back then. And as if the legacy of Rennes-le-Château wasn't scarred enough, I was intimately involved in an equal, if not bigger, fraud in recent years with Ben Hammett, the tomb man.
Oh yes, I remember that. You mentioned that on the other show that you came on, didn't you?
Oh, just unbelievable. This guy, he got his head around all the different symbolism in the church, the West Wall fresco, the altar painting, the Stations of the Cross that show a moon where at a time they're carrying Jesus's body into Joseph, his uncle's tomb, Joseph of Arimathea. Jewish burials cannot take place at night. So the thought is that that's seen as somehow portraying that there's something about Jesus's death that's not true. And so he knows all that stuff really well. But he comes out with photos of a cave where he put his camera down, and there's the tomb of Mary Magdalen. the Knights Templars had looked after, and everything looks dodgy as hell, but people are all over it. And as I'm chairman of the Rennes Group, he comes to the Rennes Group with a Sainsbury's grocery bag with artifacts from the marriage of Jesus and Mary. And it's me, no one else but me, who writes about that, the grotto, the ancient burial site of Mary Magdalen, and right next to it is a little grotto with a triangular shape. That becomes where he discovered these artifacts of Jesus and Mary's wedding.
Yeah.
And he bought them. They're legitimate. He takes them to Oxford and they're carbon dated. And yeah, they're from Jerusalem in the 1st century. Well, he bought them on eBay. They are real. And it goes on. And my good friend Bruce Burgess makes the movie Bloodline, Never Fear the Truth. He makes the movie about it, documentaries. He's written books, Two Man has. And I get really close to him. I get really close to his ex-wife. And his cook, he has a cook, is the one who reveals to me that, I know I've shared this last time we spoke, but he had already tried to fake Loch Ness Monster video with the scientist, spoke to the scientist, and they, no nonsense guys, they just weren't having it.
Mm.
But
and I think I think he also didn't he have the Ark of the Covenant he discovered as well.
I think I saved his life because he was attempting, and his cook told me this. His cook was called the Mole, was his name, and he messaged me on Facebook to say that Ben's at it again. Here's some photos. He's reconstructed the Ark of the Covenant because we know the dimensions. They're all in the Bible. In a cave in the south of France. That's all. That part is true. And he's trying to sell it to Mossad for a few million quid.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness.
You would not live very long if Mossad realizes they've been had. And
do you know the interesting thing though, Andrew, because I had a quick look on your website and I saw the picture of that mocked up Ark of the Covenant. Someone who's actually French emailed me with that exact same picture that he'd sent in a remote controlled car into this cave and apparently discovered it. So perhaps they were trying to get in on the the whole thing about that. So that's really interesting because I thought, I knew I saw that somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, you said that.
I had him feature those artifacts at multiple meetings, and everything about it just, so eventually he confessed, thanked me for forcing the confession in writing, and further tainted this story. And
I find it incredibly sad that I find it incredibly sad because the whole purpose of life really is to get to truth, which is beauty. If you can get to truth, that's really part of I mean, as I said, I'm not a Mason, but I know about polishing the ashlar, perfecting your soul as a human being, growth to find that truth. I mean, that's all we're interested in, and when you get people, it makes me so mad when you get people lying to you, and I just can't deal with it.
Well, and to deceive others
and
as
to
well.
deceive
Many others.
others,
I mean, there are some very decent people that have gone up this false path and you've got completely the wrong idea about everything because of people doing
millions of books are plagiarized, don't they? And they're perpetuating a myth and everything, and it really makes you mad, And then, of course, the idea is that when you begin questioning them or exposing, the reality of it, they don't like it, do they?
No. And I personally I enjoy in equal amounts taking something that nobody thinks is a mystery and showing them that there's a mystery here. but perhaps even more, I like taking something that everyone thinks is a mystery and saying, you know what, it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
and here's why. But I am not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. I mean, for me, it's historically validated that Rome sacked Jerusalem, Visigoths sacked Rome, and they came back to this area. Now, I know I told the story before, but I'll tell it again because it's in this context. Andrew Gough, before he was assassinated, this is, what, I don't know, 2005, 6, 7, something like that, if my memory serves me. He went to the funeral of the oldest person in Rennes-le-Château who had died, the next oldest person, the then oldest person still alive from that era, was sitting next to him and said, really going to miss him. We used to talk about the fact when Mary Magdalen, Saunier's Madonna, they used to call her, his helper, this guy used to go to her Sunday school class, and she used to give Sunday school. And at the end of Sunday school, she would close the book, the Bible, and say, "Oh, children, if I could only tell you the real story." And she used to say that if you knew what was beneath your feet, you would never, ever believe it, nor would you ever possibly want for anything greater.
So really, I think, to me personally, from what I've kind of discovered myself, and as I say, I'm not an expert on it, it's just my own discoveries, there is a secret there, but it's not what is pushed out into the general public. In my opinion, with the books of Da Vinci, the Da Vinci Code,
the bloodline,
the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, etc. There are bits in it, but it's not really going along the path to give you the truth, as it were. There is something, and I personally believe I know what it is, but I don't think it's what's being put out in the books. Personally,
I would love to hear what your theory is on that.
Oh yeah, we can.
Well, maybe we'll discuss that in private, but I'll give you some.
We'll tell you after the show.
Try not to speak.
And but in the meantime, what about us, Mo?
Yeah, there are some really interesting things though. And I think it would probably relate to certainly your understanding and knowledge to do with bees, etc., because it all links in, really. But it's interesting as well. I mean, there are things like, I think one of the most obvious things that's always put out there into the public domain is this thing about terribilis des locuses, this place is terrible, but it doesn't really mean that. It means this is a place of awe, and it's a common dedication used by the Roman Catholic Church. So it's not a mystery in the sense of what they're portraying.
But they've made it a mystery, haven't they?
Exactly. This place is fantastic.
Awesome, yeah.
The place of awe, and Asmodeus is interesting because I think I've got somewhere down here just so I can refresh my memory of it. It's yeah, that's right. Yeah, I worked it out. It was an anagram of Soma Diaz, which is the mind of God. So that was interesting. And as well, he wasn't mentioned. He's first mentioned in the Book of the Seed. Apparently, a statue of the devil was purchased from Gizzard and Co. in Toulouse. And it was never mentioned as Asmodeus until Gerard the Seed, which is quite interesting because then it links to was it the Tobit and the Solomon. So that's where that became rather interesting, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. The poor statue has had its head decapitated twice and taken
twice.
Once again 7 or 8 years ago, and the school of thought is it Rex Mundi, the Cathar? This is Cathar country, which is also really interesting. It's Cathar country. Is Rex Mundi the Cathar god of evil, or is it Asmodeus, who is the keeper of Solomon's treasures, which is such an alluring thing. And what would de Sède be doing in Rennes-le-Château, which is, there's nothing there, nothing whatsoever. But, you know, Saunière was reprimanded multiple times. He wasn't allowed to give mass anymore. He had to give mass in his home because he was digging up the churchyard. He was digging. He and Marie were digging at night, digging up tombs. And so very, very interesting that he thought there was something quite demonstrable there. And, you know, the priests in this area are just so quirky. So the one a few hundred meters away is assassinated. Boudet, who writes this bizarre book and gives ridiculous large amounts of lottery sort of winnings to Marie Denerud to give to Saunière. Where does that money come from? Why are you giving it? You know, if that isn't weird enough. And then the priest who just predates Saunière by 20 or 30 years, Louis de Coma, is just maybe a 45-minute drive away. And he creates this spectacular religious center that has all kinds of alignments on it, all sorts of Mary Magdalen crypts and themes going on. And he dies, and when he dies in 1956, the same year the Priory of Sion was born, it doesn't go back to 1090 or whatever, when the order of the Zion, that's all, I think, rubbish. But in 1956, Pierre Plantard created the Priory of Sion. It's the same year that they dynamited his estate because they didn't want religious communes to take it over, supposedly. But I've been there, and I've studied it, and I've been into his tomb. And in his tomb, where his original tomb was, there's a picture of Jesus looking like this. So his tomb is here, and Jesus is doing that. They took his body and moved it to the parking lot of the Church of St. Mary Magdalene in unconsecrated ground, which is interesting because Saunière was taken from his consecrated ground in the churchyard of Rennes-le-Château outside, just like de Coma was, into an unconsecrated ground where, you know, you can see his tomb today.
Yeah, his body was moved, wasn't it? Just recently, wasn't it? Not so long back.
Yeah. It was moved, what, 10, 12 years ago, something like that. Right. In recent times, it was moved. And you know, so you had the Tour Magdala, 22 steps, 22 steps to get to it, 22 steps up, one window at 22 degrees pointing to the burial site of Mary Magdalene. You go there. Oh my God, you have to, like, you feel like Tom Cruise in that one Mission Impossible. You're holding on like this and you drop yourself 40 feet and you hope you don't break your knees, and you eventually get to it. But right in front of it is this huge megalith, which looks just like the one in the painting in Rennes-le-Ban that shows
where we are,
Mary Magdalene. And he collected stones from there, brought them back in his russack, in his backpack, and created a grotto. And the grotto pointed at the Tour Magdala. And it said XXSLX on the seat of the grotto. Nobody's ever figured out what XXSLX means. And
that's interesting, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it doesn't really, you know, is it coordinates? 20, it just doesn't add up.
It's like the Shepherd's Monument. You know, I've had a good go at that. I've had a good go at the Shepherd's Monument because I believe it's Domus Ova, Home of the Egg. There's a 55. But what was interesting about the 55 is, and it was funny that you mentioned the dot on its own. And I was thinking about that. If you put a dot in between 5.5, So it made 5.5. The two V's as 5 and 5. Then you get 5.5. And I looked, and it's from the book of Revelation. May or may not be right, but I found that very interesting.
Yeah, Shugborough.
Shrugba.
Yeah, well, that's a fascinating place, and so this is what would you say? It's the north of London, couple-hour drive. Amazing place that the Anson family created, and it has the Shepherds of Arcadia in stone, only in inverse, and all these letters across the bottom. They wheel out the then literally, he's in a wheelchair, 80-something-year-old chap who decoded the Bletchley Code stuff during the war.
Yeah. And
he said, I'm not sure exactly, but I do believe it has to do with the Holy Grail. And then Buff Perry, who is an amazing researcher, is absolutely convinced that the Holy Grail is there or was there. And of course, Anson intercepted this great Spanish treasure ship, and who knows where the contents of that is today. I mean, Buff Perry argues that it was in Shugborough and is now in the cornerstone of the Roerich Museum, the Russian painter Roerich in New York. And that's a whole convoluted story, but it's really interesting. And will we ever know what secret that painting Shepherds of Arcadia conceals?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think sort of looking at the Poussin Shepherds of Arcadia, it basically revolves around death, doesn't it?
Yeah, even I, death. I mean, in Arcadia, even I, death. Yeah, I mean, I have sat through, as chairman of the Rennes Group, so many really brilliant people have come in to present their theories on it. And there's really pronounced colors of the shepherds, blues and yellows and reds, and sequenced in certain ways. And I've had people present really credible theories that the colors correspond to musical notes. And it's like a piece of music in a certain key that has special qualities to it to, release the mind into, other realms, that kind of thing. But it's there's a few of those paintings. One of them in Chatsworth in the UK, and the other is in the Louvre in Paris.
I was going to say the one thing, that common denominator that kind of links them all is the fact that it does revolve around a kind of death, because in them it's either a tomb or a skull, which is quite interesting. And in fact, I think that the painting of Mary Magdalen, which I think is the altar painting, which Saunière actually designed, she's sitting there with a skull, is she not?
Yeah, and that gets really interesting because who did the Knights Templar venerate? It's John.
Yeah, John the Baptist.
And there's a theory that that skull that Mary is always venerating is not Jesus, it's John. And that gets really, really interesting. And you get into this whole idea of the twins, and now you're into Prince and Picnet kind of territory. But you think about it, the time of Poussin, if you have a great secret, are you going to write about it? You could, you can conceal it, maybe in code or an allegory, but you're going to conceal it visually. So I just wonder what our modern eyes don't see. What could be in that painting that's so great and important that we can't decipher it today?
Well, I think one major clue is the fact it is a tomb, and one of the people, the shadow of one of the shepherds, is pointing to his head. The treasure is in the head, it's in the mind, isn't it? And there is a very specific thing that goes on in the mystery schools, shall we say, I believe, that's revolving around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that leads to you know, that's interesting. It could be the pineal gland. It could be just your mind is the key to, you know, reality.
Yeah.
Well, I think going to your number 22, I think 22 is very significant because when you look, for example, sort of in the Kabbalistic thing, it's the 22 paths of the Kabbalistic tree of life. You have 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. In numerology, 22 is the master builder number. And our skull is made up of 22 bones. And the skull is obviously the receptacle that receives the light, isn't it?
It's a bit of a coincidence.
Yes, just a coincidence, though.
Just a coincidence.
But it's interesting because the word light is actually found 264 times in the Bible. Now, when divided by 12, as in the 12 apostles, we then have 22, which
22.
represents light. 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, which were used to compose the word of God. Now, the word of God is called a lamp in Psalms, and that's 119.105. Now, a lamp is obviously a light to live by. Light is used 22 times in the Gospel of John. The 22nd time that John says, he's quoting Jesus, says, I have come as a light into the world. And 22 is a Gnostic key to revelation in the Bible. And in Isaiah 22:22, it says, and the key of the house of David will I lay upon his shoulder. So he shall open and none shall shut, and he shall shut and none shall open. So what do we think that is?
Yeah.
Nice.
I think that's the thing is, Andrew, I think
so it's very important. Yeah,
I think the difference is that, you know, my great interest is this Shakespeare thing as well. But when you look at it, the soul, the existence of the soul is what really everybody should know exists. Your soul exists. And that communication that you have with whether you want to call it the spirit world, God, whatever you want to call it, truly does exist. And it proves eternal life. And that's what I reckon. I reckon it proves eternal life. And I really believe that all these things that Shona's talking about is showing you that energy doesn't evaporate, doesn't go. It exists forever. You know, it's an eternal life. And I think that's what the message is. Yeah.
It's eternal. It's immortal.
Yeah. The womb, they're in the tomb wherein they grew. Yeah. And I think it's quite interesting that Shona was pointing out to me, which I didn't know, but I think there's something you've done, was the word Grail, because I found that the other week, and it's the French word for dish, which is Graal. And we had this theory of it because of the head of John the Baptist was on a charger, was on a dish, and it's in the Last Supper painting, that it sort of implied to me that the Grail was the body and the head was the tomb. I mean, that's what it implies.
Interesting. Well, you're reminding me that when Saunière came back from Paris, he added new statues in his church. It's tiny church, as big as this living room, tiny. And he rearranged the other ones. So if you connect them all in a straight line, forming an M, it goes from Saint Germain, Saint Luke, Anton, two of them, both of which have the feast day of the 17th, and Saint Luke. So it's Graal, which
Graal,
is
Graal.
Very weird, to say the least.
It is. Yeah. I think that's absolutely spot on.
He's telling you that the Grail is there, isn't it? But what is the Grail? That's the point.
That's the point.
Is it an object, or is it something else?
Or is it both?
And you know, if you look at, I've traced all the sort of references to Arthur and there are hardly any. And there was, gosh, I mean, it starts in the 6th century. There's mentions of battles, and then the word Arthur is named. And it's not till Mallory. You're talking much, much, much later that there's Camelot, and there's a Lady of the Lake, and the sword, and Excalibur, and all of a sudden the Holy Grail is the bloodline of it's the blood from the crucifixion and the chalice, and it's almost like a Hollywood treatment. So the Grail, I don't know, a stone from heaven is what
I think it could be a representation of that. Yeah.
History
is interesting as well.
It's quite interesting because I remember, I think you talked about that before, about perhaps the Grail being a meteorite.
Yeah, it's the same numerological number as meteorite, and what's a stone from heaven? It's a meteorite, and in numerology, it's the same thing. It's also bit in Egyptian, which means bee. Which is also interesting, and you can see where Egyptian obelisk would be, venerating that object that fell from a conical shape from the sky. I can kind of see that, but is the Grail a real thing? If Eschenbach was writing history and he's named the right hermit who initiates Parsifal, and he's talking about objects that appear to be objects from Solomon's temple brought by the Visigoths to that region in the south of France, then what is the Grail if it is a stone?
It's interesting.
And it is interesting as well, because I think there's possibly an allegorical side of that as well as an actual side, because it's interesting with meteorites. What do meteorites bring to Earth? They bring something called phosphorus, which is the very essence of life. Without phosphorus, we wouldn't have any life, and phosphorus gives a green glow, doesn't it? Which is quite interesting.
Absolutely.
And it's also the one thing that it doesn't ever degrade, phosphorus, does it? So if you have it in your body, if you pass away and your body goes in the ground, everything else will kind of degrade away, but not phosphorus.
Not phosphorus, yeah.
Phosphorus, the green glow. And isn't it interesting that phosphorus was Venus?
Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah.
It's connected with Venus, which is the
there's
symbol of 8.
And there's another interesting thing. We're talking about King Arthur. Was it Lancelot who placed his lance in the Holy Grail? And I think it was Lancelot, wasn't it? Was it Lancelot?
I think so.
I'm not sure, but anyway, someone plunged
his lance in there.
Someone put their lance in the Holy Grail.
It sounds like something else.
Yeah, it sounds like something else. And the other thing is, I always thought when I was talking about the spear of destiny, because I'm not a believer in Jesus, I've got to be honest. But anyway, when you're talking about the spear of destiny, I always believe that the spear of destiny was the penis, and the reason for that is because I must say that, and the reason I believe it's that is because quite simply because a child is born from the union between man and a woman. And that child can have destiny in its hands. It could be a world leader. It could do anything. Yeah.
It's the act of creation.
The act of creation, yeah.
And I think it's interesting because you could then link that symbolically to the act of creation when something happens spiritually as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
So your head, in other words, is the receptacle. I mean, to the ancients, the head was divine. It was a divine symbol.
Yeah,
I like that. I really do. I think the Holy Grail it's become such a universal symbol of personal attainment and achievement, and it can mean many things to many different people. But when you trace it back to the very, very, very beginning, it's a stone from heaven, which is such an interesting thought because that's a meteorite. And in a lot of my work on bees, I have traced what I argue is the most famous stone from heaven was Cybele, the goddess in Turkey. And when meteorites were falling on Rome, they were losing the war to Hannibal. they said, okay, this is really serious. We have got to go get the mother goddess. We have to go get Cybele. And they go and get her. The Turkish people are happy to give her. They're honored that Rome has asked for her. And she comes back, and they put this meteorite, which is the most famous manifestation of Cybele, into its own temple. It's worshipped for a few hundred years. Then when it disappears, it's a big black stone. It's a meteorite. And when it disappears, the black stone of Mecca, of Kaaba, appears. And its ancient name wasn't ever so respectfully, it wasn't Allah, it was Alat, meaning the old woman. And it was a stone that priestesses would circle counterclockwise naked 7 times in honor of this woman whose title was the Keeper of Destiny. And what a better title for a meteorite than the Keeper of Destiny.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because the circling round anti-clockwise, isn't that something to do with the sun? Isn't that what happens?
Yeah. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but tomorrow I'm going to be proofreading my final version of my next article. And it's been 3 years since I've written an article for my website, because I've been involved with something that I can't write about and can't talk about, but it has to do with a Knights Templar excavation in England. And so it's kind of gotten me off track in terms of my writing, but I've morphed into this. Before I write about it, I want to present it 3 or 4 times to a big audience and get their feedback. And so I've been presenting, I did that with the inner earth stuff, and now I've written about that. But now I'm writing about, are we living in the inner earth? Are we inside the earth? It's an article about the firmament.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And, after that, I'm going to write, if I'm bold enough, because I can't believe nobody in this genre, all the great researchers and writers, nobody's writing about Tartaria, and it's time to put some pen to paper on that.
Andrew, can I ask you, if this the meteorite? So if we got a firmament, right, which I'm not sure about either way. I want it to be proven to me, so that I can have a fact work, because I'm not sure, and I don't believe it's as it's supposed to be. Going spinning round and 660. I don't believe in any of that, and I don't believe a lot of the stuff NASA comes out with either. But where would the meteorite come from in your view if we're in a firmament?
Well, it's a fascinating question. First of all, NASA means in Hebrew to deceive.
Deceive, yeah.
Aptly named. I don't believe a single word they've ever said. And every ancient culture has spoken about the firmament. The second day of creation, God created this watery structure above us to protect us from the watery abyss beyond, to keep our earth dry. And when Mike Degree was doing The Blue Planet, famous documentary maker, he is The Blue Planet, which was narrated by pardon? Yeah, Richard Attenborough. Thank you. Years later, he did an interview, and he said, the weirdest thing is I'm at the bottom of the ocean in a submarine, and we see a lake. And we're like, hang on, we're in the bottom of the ocean, and there's a lake. Let's go check out the lake. So they go with the submarine, and they're bouncing off of it. And he said, it was so super saline, the submarine couldn't go down in the lake. And it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. 2 weeks later, his helicopter exploded and he was dead. Now, in 2014, the civilian group, I forget the name of the acronym for the bunch of civilians who do space exploration without any funding or sponsorship. And they sent a rocket up called Go Fast in 2014. And it's 72.
With a camera on it.
camera on it,
Yeah.
and it's going at an incredible speed, and it hits something. It doesn't explode. It hits it.
You go, "Doing, doing, doing."
It just sits there, and then a couple minutes later, it falls down.
Yeah, I've seen that video, Andrew. Yeah.
It's. I feel they've hit the firmament. Every ancient culture talks about the firmament, and it gets even weirder because it's not as though. And this is what Enoch was talking about. It's what Byrd was talking about. The firmament appears to be over a huge, vast area, and Antarctica is at one edge of where it comes down, but it doesn't come down neatly like a snow globe around our continents. It includes other continents like old maps show Atlantis, Thule, Lemura, the continent bigger than the United States, that Admiral Byrd, the most decorated military man in U.S. history, says is just beyond Antarctica. We can't agree on currency. We can't agree on COVID. We can't agree on anything, but we can agree, stay the hell away from Antarctica. We have a treaty there.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, he was supposed to be doing a mapping project, I believe, but there was an awful lot of military style vehicles and things there for a mapping project, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was incredible. 4,000 people, planes, everything you can imagine, ships beyond belief. And he did interviews, one with a Brazilian newspaper, where he said, and this is something I really struggle with, I'm fascinated by, we need to be really concerned about the rate at which the world is shrinking. Now, I don't mean to get political or get you banned here, but I'm not a proponent of global warming. I don't believe in it personally.
No,
we don't either. No.
We're on the same side.
15 minutes. You ask yourself, why would they be promoting global? 15-minute cities in Oxford and in London. You can't leave your city without. Okay, now we know where you're going with that. But the point is, what was Byrd talking about? The world is getting so much smaller. Is the firmament shrinking? Is that what the farce that is global warming is inferring? I don't know.
Have you seen that thing with the blue ice? Sorry, Shona. Have you seen that thing with the blue ice? I don't know how true that is, but they were saying if you drilled into this ice, it basically reformed again. It's impossible to get through it. Have you seen that?
I don't think I've seen that. I'd like to.
Yeah, it's they call it blue ice. On on Telegram and that you see some strange things, to say the least. But I know people can make videos up and everything, but some things are truly unexplainable, and that's why Telegram does interest me, because there's so many things on there. It's amazing.
Well, the 1950s, I don't want to get into a discussion about flat Earth or round Earth, because that's really contentious. But okay, let's just think about this, guys. I mean, forget what we've been taught. We're spinning at 1,000 miles an hour while traveling 666,000 miles an hour around the sun.
Yeah.
We don't feel it. But butterflies can fly up without gravity holding them down.
Yeah.
And there's something wrong with that equation. And if you don't question that, since the 1950s on airplanes, when airplanes became, my father was a pilot for TWA, and he told me this, that they would put bowed windows on. So the horizon looks like it's rounded. The windows are bowed. They are today. And when I look at that civilian air flight of Go Fast in 2014, people use that as, oh, look at the Earth is round. I look at it and I think, I don't see any curvature myself.
Well, there's, funny thing is, some lady at a bus stop, she said, I was talking about some things, and she said, oh, you're one of those conspiracy theorists. I said, no, darling, I'm a seeker of truth.
Yeah, I mean, everything about our history has been, we've been hoodwinked. And Tartaria, I think it's so obvious now. I mean, just think about Oh God, how come every World's Fair? Look at London and what is now what was moved to Crystal Palace. Every World's Fair is the same story. The most unbelievable structures you can imagine, intricate sculptures, just gargantuan. They have the World's Fair, then they just totally destroy it.
And are the pyramids? Do the pyramids go way deep into the ground? Have you seen that?
I've seen that. I don't know what to think. I just, what I know is that we can't believe anything we've been told. Anything. And I mean, have you walked down the street and seen old buildings that have on the street level half the window below the ground, half the window above? It's kind of like, okay. And once you start to look at buildings that you were told were built in 1850, even 1900, and you look at them, they're grandiose, they're spectacular with these intricate carvings, ridiculous carvings of veils and just amazing things. And you look at the people who lived at that time, and they're lucky if they have horse and carriage, and you never question. And it's not about oh, the aliens did it. No, it's about we did it. But we've just come out of an era that was called what was the last 3 years called? The Great Reset. Build back better. Excuse me? What? And it's not the first. There's been many resets, and it explains so many of the anomalies we see with buildings that appear to be modern, but really, how did they build that given what they had available to them?
It's amazing, isn't it? Cathedrals and I mean, how the hell do they do that? I don't know.
Cathedrals, cathars, creators of electricity. The rose window is a great example of a conductor of electricity, and Great Resets have rebranded all these things. So I need to be careful because I don't want to hurt your YouTube. I'll just leave it there. But
it's all out there for thinking about for people, isn't it? I mean, that's the idea of free discussion and free speech, is that you don't have to agree with what someone's saying, but you should be allowed to say it, and then people can form their own opinions, which is what it's all about, isn't it? Or
well, you have to be able to debate with reason, don't you? I mean, that's the whole point of debate, isn't it? To debate with reason, and you're not saying you're wrong or you're right. You just want to debate, and that's the whole point of it, isn't it?
Yeah. And do you know, one of the things that I find really interesting is David Icke. And here's a guy who thought he was the Godhead, a sports announcer, dressing in robes and being really ridiculous. What better person to ensure that they disseminate the truth than someone who's made such a fool of themselves that anything they say will never be believed again? So let's disseminate it through him in case somebody really smart and credible says those things and people believe it. But David Icke, I've read all his books, and I'm waiting for him to be wrong about something.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave it.
I'll be after the show.
I'll talk to you in private.
We'll talk to you after the show and that. But it's
my lips are sealed.
Yeah, lips are sealed. Yeah. But that's the point, is that we've learned an awful lot, and that's what life is about learning, talking to interesting people like yourself, and and discovering new things. And
it's always really fascinating talking to you, Andrew, because you're such a fascinating man, and your interests kind of cross on all kind of different genres, and that's why it's so interesting.
Yeah, that's right. It's that's what, and the point of it is to be able to sort out the wheat from the chaff. That's what makes a human being. that little bit extra, that they're able to do that. They're able to sort the wheat from the chaff out. And, you know, I always said this, if somebody showed me, after I could believe in something for 50 years, and someone said to me, Gary, you're wrong on that, and here's why you're wrong. Let me show you the evidence. And I would change my mind, right? I would change my mind.
Exactly. And you have to be willing to really abandon your beliefs in favor of the evidence. And I have a number of just remarkably brilliant, esoteric, just the best researchers. They leave me in the dust, and not one of them will go to Telegram. No. I don't want to be presented with anything that's right wing or anti woke. And I think, I may not believe what's on the television, but what's on Telegram is going to brainwash me. I'm not going to look. And I'm like, oh my God, imagine if the internet came out and you said, I'm not going to go on the internet because I might learn something that is inconsistent with my beliefs.
Exactly. You know, what's the point of selling thousands of books all over the world if it's based on a lie and you're not willing to accept that someone else has come along and shown you that what you were trying to portray as truth was not truth at all? It was a falsehood, you know.
And there just isn't so many great researchers who are writing about Göbekli Tepe and Baalbek and Egypt. Not one of them is thinking about our Tartaria or the Satanic Cabal or things that are going on in our world today. It's just, let's talk some more about Göbekli Tepe. Maybe it's 12,000 years old. Come on. Don't you see it? So, and everyone is extremely smart and switched on. And I just think, and I encourage people, you are so brilliant. I probably have an IQ like this compared to you guys, but it all comes down to what information that you're exposed to, and you're not going to find it on mainstream media. I swear to goodness you're not. So just look beyond and decide for yourself.
Exactly. And that's how you find truth, by searching for it, not by accepting what someone's told you. You must look for it yourself.
And that's the thing, Andrew. It's like, you know, when you go on sort of the spiritual road and you start, and everyone's saying, oh, you know, go to the Spiritualist Association, do this, do that, read a book on this, read a book on that. And I never read a book in my life. And, you know, that journey that you go on, that's the most amazing journey, your own one. And your own experiences are what matter, you know, because you can find truth yourself. Every one of us can find truth ourselves. And we don't need anything for that.
Well, you're your own book of truth, aren't you, really?
Your own book of truth, yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's more important now than ever. Just trust your own gut on
intuition.
Question everything, because you know, it's a whole nother episode of where history, his story. So who is he?
And history is written by the victors, isn't it?
History is written by the victors,
Very famous line.
His story. Do you guys, who would you say, do you have a feeling for who he is?
He. Do you mean God?
Oh, I think his story is a fraudulent story. I think it's something more along the lines of Baal. I think it's very dark. The story that's been weaved, but you know, we're taking the Great Reset and upping it with the Great Awakening. So take that.
Well, there is something very definitely going on with all that, but that will be a conversation on another time in a private capacity. I think
private capacity.
But anyway, getting back, because we've kind of deviated away from Rennes-le-Château somewhat in that, but it's all good. But could you just sort of do maybe a summing up, because we've got about 5 minutes left. So what are your thoughts basically about the whole mystery? So we've established basically that a lot of the mystery, shall we say, and the stories woven around it are not actually quite what, you know, we've been told and what perhaps we thought they were, but maybe there's something else there.
Yeah, I think we, you know, unemotively, we can rule out the Priory of Sion as being an ancient secret society that included Da Vinci and Debussy and Cocteau and Plant. That never existed. There are secret societies. They tend to be not very benevolent. Look at Bilderberg. Look at WEF. Look at, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's a grain of truth in the Rennes-le-Château mystery that is standing despite the fact that Pierre Plantard and Henry Lincoln and Philip Duchesne have tainted it, and Ben Hammett has tainted it. There's this possibility that some of the greatest treasures from antiquity that the Nazis believed are still there or were there, and hence the stories of Parzival and the Holy Grail, the story of Rennes-le-Château. And I think it's worthy of people who are really prepared to take themselves where the evidence leads them and look at it with really, really fresh eyes. Because I think despite the fraud and misdirection, there's a reason why this place and this story has been targeted. Maybe people don't want you to believe there's anything even remotely credible going on there. I tend to think the story continues, and it hasn't been closed out, in my opinion, at all.
No, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. There are certain things there, as we sort of mentioned towards the beginning of the program, that you could say are very definitely Masonic related. But then, of course, we have to look at Freemasonry and say, well, where did that originate? So, you know, there are much older
the schools of mystery.
Exactly. They're much older kind of things going on, shall we say.
And also we could look at Asmodeus as a representation of Pan, the nature god. And then we can all rejoice that there is a god of nature.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of Pan, actually.
Well, it's interesting as well that Asmodeus, if you want to call him that, that's supposed to be in the chapel, as we see, is also dressed in green, which I think is quite significant, isn't it? He has a green robe on.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me started on green. That leads to the whole thing. But you know, one of my really dear friends who's watching as we speak from the States has messaged me to say, "You're talking about Rennes-le-Château. Oh, bless you. Make Rennes-le-Château great again."
Sounds just like a certain person we know, doesn't it? We'll have to get some hats made.
Yes. With Asmodeus.
I love it. We can't help being great again. Yeah, wait.
I would buy one.
Yeah, let's bless King Arthur before we go.
Oh dear. But no, it's still, to me, I mean, if you sort of just clear the ways apart, you know, all the sort of disinformation and everything else, if we clear it away so that we have another path to tread at Rennes-le-Château, to me personally, there is something of great significance there, I believe, personally. From the things that I've discovered. And I'm sure other people must have discovered this as well. So there is something of great interest, irrespective whether it was done at the time partly for tourism, other things as well. Well, who knows? But it's a very, very interesting thing, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I really encourage people to go there. It's a great getaway. Fly into Carcassonne and
fabulous.
South.
Andrew, I'm so sorry to cut across you because I'm so enjoying the conversation, but I'm going to have to end the conversation. And thank you so much for coming on. It's super interesting and lovely to talk to you as normal. I love it. And we'll have to, if you will, come on again. So thank you for joining us on The Allens Investigate. You can check us out at www.theallensinvestigate.com. We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, which is 105.3 and 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans, and also on Roku. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Bye.
You guys.